The acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled Maintenance Bay 42 as Finn Harrison made his final adjustments to the station's power coupling. His large hands, surprisingly nimble despite their size, carefully manipulated the micro-tools as he sealed the last connection. At 6'4", he had to hunch uncomfortably in the cramped maintenance tunnel, but after 5 years on Outpost Zenith, he'd grown accustomed to the awkward positions his job required. "All clear, Control," he muttered into his comm unit. "Power coupling stable. Releasing lockdown." The acknowledgement came as a brief burst of static, just the way he liked it. Minimal communication, maximum efficiency. It had become his motto since taking this position on the edge of human space, far from the complications and memories he'd left behind on Earth. A sudden tremor shook the station, nearly causing him to drop his tools. Before he could query Control, emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the maintenance sector. "Unscheduled arrival in Bay 17, the station's AI announced. Warning, vessel showing critical damage. Emergency protocols engaged." Finn was already moving, his long legs eating up the distance between bays. As senior engineer on duty, critical damages fell under his jurisdiction. He reached Bay 17 just as the magnetic containment field flashed into place, its blue shimmer barely containing the sparks of plasma bleeding from what had to be the strangest ship he'd ever seen. The vessel was tiny, almost delicate in its construction, with sweeping lines that suggested both speed and grace. But what caught his attention wasn't its unusual design, it was the fact that it was still flying at all. The entire port side was scorched with weapon damage, and the engine configuration was bleeding energy in patterns that defied standard physics. The ship settled onto the deck with surprising gentleness, given its condition. As Finn approached, diagnostic tablet already scanning, the entry hatch cycled open with a soft hiss. He stopped dead in his tracks. The pilot who emerged was barely 4 feet tall, with silver-tinted skin that seemed to shimmer under the bay's harsh lighting. Her features were delicately proportioned, almost ethereal, but it was her eyes that held him transfixed, large, luminescent orbs of deepest violet that seemed to peer straight through his carefully constructed walls. "Well," she said, her voice carrying an almost musical quality despite its underlying tension, "I don't suppose you'd believe this was all scheduled maintenance?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth, though Finn noticed how she kept one hand pressed against her side, where a darker silver stain was spreading across her flight suit. "You're injured," he said, already reaching for the emergency med kit at his belt. "Observant." She swayed slightly, and Finn moved without thinking, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and he was struck by how small she felt, like supporting a child, except there was nothing childlike about the way she carried herself. "I'm Naira Valeth," she managed, those extraordinary eyes looking up at him with a mixture of pain and something else he couldn't quite read. "And I'm afraid I'm about to make your day significantly more complicated." The sound of boots on metal deck plating echoed from the corridor, multiple sets, moving with military precision. "Corporate security," she whispered, her small hand gripping his forearm with surprising strength. "They can't find what I'm carrying. It would mean war." Finn knew he should step away. "Call security. Follow protocols." Instead, he found himself asking, "Why should I trust you?" She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her alien features into something haunting in its beauty. "Because, Finn Harrison, I trusted you enough to land here. Your reputation for integrity is well known, even among my people. And right now, you're all that stands between this station and a diplomatic incident that could tear the galaxy apart." The footsteps were getting closer. Finn looked at the injured alien woman before him, then at the approaching shadows on the bay walls. 5 years of carefully maintained isolation balanced against a moment's decision that could change everything. "Med bay's this way," he said finally, scooping her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, but the way she relaxed against his chest felt strangely significant. But you're going to tell me exactly what I'm getting myself into. Of course, she murmured, her breath warm against his neck. Though I should warn you, the truth is far stranger than anything you're imagining. As they slipped through the maintenance access panel, Finn couldn't help thinking that his life of quiet routine had just gotten exponentially more complicated. And surprisingly, he wasn't entirely sure that was a bad thing. The maintenance tunnels of Outpost Zenith were never designed for someone of Finn's size, but he navigated them with practiced ease, Nyra's slight form cradled against his chest. Her breathing had grown shallow, the silver stain on her flight suit spreading despite the pressure she maintained on the wound. The med bay's too obvious, she whispered, her violet eyes flickering with what might have been pain or fear. They'll check there first. Good thing I'm not taking you to med bay, then. Finn made another turn, descending through access ways few on the station even knew existed. 5 years of fixing this place, you learn all the shortcuts. And the secrets. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Clever human. Though I'm beginning to think that's redundant where you're concerned. They emerged into a small workshop, tools and spare parts organized with meticulous precision. A hidden sanctuary Finn had carved out for himself in the belly of the station. He gently set Nyra down on his workbench, trying to ignore how natural it felt to hold her. Engineering first aid station, he explained, retrieving a med kit from a concealed panel. For accidents we don't want on official records. Quite the rebel beneath that professional exterior. Nyra winced as she tried to sit up straighter. I chose well. You didn't choose anything, Finn countered, activating a portable scanner. You crashed into my station. Did I? Those impossible eyes locked onto his. Your station has 17 maintenance bays, Finn Harrison. I picked this one because you were on duty. Because every intelligence report I read said you were the one person here who might understand what's at stake. The scanner beeped, displaying readings that made little sense. Your cellular structure, it's not just your size that's different, is it? My people are called the Stellarians, she said softly. We evolved in a system with unique radiation patterns. It affected our development, hence the size, the biological differences. It's also why we've kept largely to ourselves. Until now. Finn began treating her wound with synthesis gel, designed to adapt to any biology. And what changed? We discovered something. Something that certain corporate interests would very much like to possess. Her small hand caught his, fingers barely spanning his palm. Something that could change the balance of power in this sector of space. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the station's superstructure above them. Finn instinctively moved to shield Nyra from view, though he knew they were well hidden. Corporate mercenaries, she explained. Ex-military, mostly. They've been chasing me across 3 systems. A bitter laugh escaped her. All for something that was never meant to be a weapon. What is it? Nyra reached into a hidden pocket of her flight suit, withdrawing a crystal no larger than her thumbnail. Within its facets, colors shifted and swirled in patterns that seemed to defy physics. A key, she said. To understanding the quantum nature of consciousness itself. My people discovered it by accident, a crystalline structure that can bridge the gap between organic minds and artificial ones. In the right hands, it could revolutionize everything from medical technology to space travel. And in the wrong hands? Forced consciousness transfer. Involuntary neural linking. The ability to override any AI or biological mind. She closed her fingers around the crystal. Imagine an entire station's population, enslaved with a thought. The implications hit Finn like a physical blow. They're not just after the crystal, are they? They need you, someone who understands how it works. Now you begin to see why I couldn't risk standard protocols. Nyra's expression softened. I'm sorry for involving you, but I needed someone who would listen. Someone who would understand that sometimes, regulations must bend to prevent greater wrongs. Another explosion of boots and voices above, closer now. Finn's mind raced through options, possibilities, consequences. 5 years of carefully maintained isolation weighed against the fate of potentially millions. The crystal, he said finally. Can you destroy it? Naira shook her head. Its quantum structure is self-stabilizing. Destroying it would require energy levels that would take half the station with it. Then we hide it. Here. He moved to a panel in the floor, revealing a small safe built into the station's structural supports. Quantum shielding, for storing sensitive equipment. They won't be able to scan for it. They'll tear the station apart looking for it. Naira's voice held a note of warning. And for me. Finn met her gaze. Then we give them something else to chase. The ghost of a smile returned to her face. I knew there was a reason I liked you. She slipped the crystal into his palm, her touch lingering longer than necessary. But you should know, helping me makes you a target too. Once we do this, there's no going back to your quiet life. He secured the crystal in the safe, remembering the last time he'd chosen safety over action. The regret that had driven him to this isolated post. Maybe quiet is overrated. Naira's smile widened, transforming her alien features into something that made his heart skip. In that case, my surprisingly adventurous engineer, I hope you're ready for some excitement. Because unless I miss my guess, we have about 10 minutes before they start searching this sector. 8 minutes, he corrected, already gathering essential tools and supplies. But I know a few more shortcuts they don't. 8 minutes to evade a professional tactical team? Her eyes sparkled with what might have been fear or anticipation. I don't suppose you have a brilliant plan? Finn shouldered his pack, then carefully lifted her again, noting how she nestled against him without hesitation. Let's just say that sometimes being the quiet maintenance guy has its advantages. Ready to trust me? Strangely enough, she murmured, her breath warm against his neck, I already do. The bowels of Outpost Zenith held secrets that even its builders had forgotten. Finn moved through the darkness with practiced ease, one hand trailing along the wall while the other supported Naira. Her small form pressed against his side as she matched his pace, her natural grace making up for their height difference. Security override in sectors 7 through 12, the station AI announced overhead. All personnel are required to submit to identification checks. They're locking down the main corridors, Naira whispered, her luminescent eyes piercing the shadows. How much further to your ship? Not my ship, Finn corrected, guiding them through a maintenance shaft that would have been claustrophobic even for someone of Naira's size. Emergency repair vessel. Basically a glorified toolbox with engines. Perfect. He could hear the smile in her voice. Small targets are harder to hit. A sudden flash of light ahead made them freeze. Finn pulled Naira into an alcove, his larger frame completely shielding her from view. Her hands gripped his maintenance uniform, and he could feel her rapid heartbeat, faster than human normal, but steady. Station control to Harrison. The voice crackling through his comm made him tense. Report to operations immediately. Priority override. Naira's fingers tightened on his uniform. They both knew what it meant, someone in operations was working with the corporate mercenaries. Someone who knew Finn's access codes could get them into restricted areas. Acknowledged, Control, he responded, keeping his voice neutral. Currently handling a critical repair in Sector 9. Will report when complete. Negative, Harrison. Report now or... He switched off the comm. Well, that confirms it. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they trace that signal. 3 minutes, Naira corrected, her violet eyes meeting his in the darkness. And you just sacrificed your career here. Why? The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Finn thought of his carefully constructed isolation, the walls he'd built after the accident that drove him to this remote post. Walls that a 4-foot-tall alien had somehow slipped through in the space of an hour. "Because you were right," he said finally. "Some things matter more than protocols." A distant explosion rocked the station, making them both stumble. Finn automatically steadied Naira, his hands spanning her waist. She felt impossibly delicate under his touch, yet he'd seen the strength hidden in that small frame. "They're getting desperate," she murmured, not moving from his grasp. "Which means we're running out of time." "The crystal is safe." He released her reluctantly. "But you're right. We need to move." They resumed their journey through the station's hidden passages, each bringing their own strengths to their escape. Naira's size let her spot shortcuts Finn would have missed, while his strength helped them bypass sealed hatches that would have stopped her alone. They were nearly to the repair bay when the betrayal came. "Hello, Finn." The voice emerged from the shadows ahead, followed by the distinctive whine of a charging plasma weapon. "I'm afraid this is as far as you go." Lieutenant Reed stepped into view, her security uniform immaculate as always. 2 armed corporate agents flanked her, their black armor absorbing the emergency lighting. "I expected better from you, Harrison," Reed continued, her aim never wavering. 5 years of exemplary service, thrown away for what? Some alien runt and her stolen tech. Finn felt Naira tense beside him. "The crystal isn't stolen tech," she said, her musical voice carrying surprising authority despite her size. "It's a scientific discovery that your employers want to weaponize. Do you know what they're paying for that discovery?" Reed's smile held no warmth. "Enough to buy a whole planet. Now, hand it over, and maybe we can pretend this little adventure never happened." Finn shifted slightly, angling his body to shield more of Naira. "You know I can't do that." "Actually, you can." Reed's finger tightened on the trigger. "Because if you don't, I start shooting. And I'm betting your new friend isn't as durable as you are." Time seemed to slow. Finn saw Reed's finger twitch, saw the plasma bolt leaving the weapon. But before he could move, something small and incredibly fast darted past him. Naira seemed to flow like liquid silver, her smaller size and quick reflexes letting her slip under the plasma bolt. She was inside Reed's guard before the lieutenant could adjust her aim, those delicate-looking hands striking with precision at nerve clusters. The corporate agents brought their weapons up, but Finn was already moving. His longer reach let him disarm the first one with a savage twist, while Naira's momentum carried her into a spinning kick that caught the second agent in the knee. The fight was over in seconds. Reed lay unconscious, her own restraints binding her wrists, while the corporate agents slumped against the wall. "That," Finn said, slightly out of breath, "was impressive." Naira smoothed her flight suit with dignified grace. Stellarian martial arts focus on using an opponent's size against them. Being small has its advantages. "I noticed." He couldn't help but smile. "Anything else I should know about?" "Many things." She returned his smile, those extraordinary eyes sparkling. "But right now, we should focus on not dying. Unless I miss my guess, those were just the advance team." As if on cue, more boots thundered in the distance. Finn quickly gathered the fallen weapons while Naira accessed a nearby terminal, her fingers dancing over the controls. "The repair vessel," she said urgently. "How far?" "2 junctions ahead. But they'll be watching the launch bay." "Good thing we're not using the launch bay." She finished whatever she was doing at the terminal and turned to him. "Do you trust me?" The question should have given him pause. They'd known each other for barely 2 hours, during which his entire life had been upended. Yet looking at her, this tiny, fierce, brilliant being who'd crashed into his carefully ordered existence, he found the answer was simple. "Yes." Her smile lit up her entire face. "Then get ready to catch me. Because this is either going to be brilliant or spectacularly messy." Before he could ask what she meant, Naira slammed her palm down on the terminal. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the sector, except for a maintenance hatch that suddenly cycled open beside them, revealing the star-filled void of space. The explosive decompression yanked them both off their feet. But even as they were pulled toward the hatch, Finn saw Naira's plan. The repair vessel was docked on the hull barely 20 meters away, its airlock perfectly positioned. He caught her as they tumbled into space, his larger form wrapping protectively around her smaller one. Their momentum carried them exactly where they needed to go, proving that Naira's calculations had been perfect. As they crashed into the airlock, Finn couldn't help but think that sometimes the best plans were the ones crazy enough to work. Especially when they involved a tiny alien genius who'd somehow managed to turn his world upside down in all the right ways. The repair vessel's cabin was designed for utility, not comfort. Finn sat at the controls, his broad shoulders nearly touching both walls, while Naira worked on the communications array. Her small hands moved with practiced efficiency through circuitry that would have challenged his larger fingers. "There," she said, closing the access panel. "I've masked our energy signature. To their sensors, we'll look like space debris." Finn checked their heading, plotting a course through the asteroid field ahead. "That should buy us some time. But this ship wasn't built for long-range travel. We've got maybe 3 days of life support. 2 days and 14 hours, to be precise." Naira moved to stand beside him, her head barely reaching his shoulder even when he was seated. "Enough time to reach the Stellarian outpost in the Vega sector. My people can protect the crystal there." The mention of their destination brought an unexpected pang to Finn's chest. 2 days and 14 hours. Then she'd be gone, taking with her the most excitement and connection he'd felt in years. "You're thinking too loud," Naira said softly, those violet eyes studying his face. "Care to share?" Before he could respond, proximity alarms blared. A corporate cruiser had emerged from hyperspace directly ahead of them. "Hold on," Finn warned, throwing the ship into a steep dive. Naira braced herself against his chair, her smaller form adapting easily to the sudden maneuver. They plunged into the asteroid field, the repair vessel's smaller size now a decisive advantage. Finn weaved through gaps that the cruiser couldn't hope to follow, years of maintenance work translating into instinctive understanding of their ship's capabilities. 2 more signatures approaching from port, Naira reported, monitoring the sensors. "They're trying to box us in." Finn spotted a massive asteroid tumbling ahead, its surface riddled with deep fissures. "Then let's give them something else to think about." He rolled the ship sideways, slipping into one of the fissures just as the cruiser's energy weapons heated the space they'd occupied. The asteroid's mass would block their sensors, but also their own communications and navigation. In the sudden darkness, lit only by emergency panels and Naira's bioluminescent eyes, the cabin felt impossibly intimate. "That was either brilliant or insane," she said, a note of admiration in her musical voice. "I'm learning from you." He tried to smile, but winced as pain shot through his shoulder, a souvenir from their space walk to the ship. Naira noticed immediately. "You're hurt. Why didn't you say something?" Before he could protest, she was examining his shoulder with gentle but firm touches. Her hands might have been small, but they found the injury with professional precision. "Microfracture from the impact," she diagnosed. "Here, let me." She pressed her palm flat against his shoulder, and suddenly warmth spread through the joint, easing the pain. Finn stared at her in surprise. "Stellarian bioresonance," she explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "We can influence cellular repair in other organisms. I should have mentioned it earlier, but you weren't sure you could trust me?" He caught her hand as she started to pull away, marveling at how it disappeared in his larger one. "No," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure I could trust myself. Humans are fascinating. Especially you." The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finn became acutely aware of how close she was standing, how her silver skin seemed to glow in the dim light. "I've never met anyone like you," he found himself saying. "And I don't just mean physically." "Does it bother you?" she asked, a vulnerability in her voice he hadn't heard before. "The difference in our sizes? In our species?" "The only thing that bothers me," he said carefully, "is knowing that in less than 3 days, you'll be gone." Naira's free hand came up to touch his face, her delicate fingers tracing his jaw. What if that wasn't the end? A distant explosion rocked the asteroid, reminding them of their pursuers. But neither moved away. "They're using depth charges," Naira said, though her eyes never left his face. "Trying to flush us out." "Let them try." Finn's thumb traced circles on her palm, marveling at how something so small could affect him so deeply. "We've got 2 days and 13 hours to figure this out. Together." "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word. "You know, for someone who spent 5 years avoiding connections, you're surprisingly good at making them." "Maybe I was just waiting for the right one." Another explosion, closer this time. Naira reluctantly stepped back, though her hand lingered in his. "We should move," she said. "Find another hiding spot before they get lucky." Finn nodded, already plotting potential routes through the asteroid field. But as they prepared to emerge from their temporary shelter, he knew something had fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer just fugitives sharing a desperate escape. They were two beings from vastly different worlds, discovering that sometimes the heart's gravity could bridge any distance, even the space between stars. "Ready?" he asked, his hand on the controls. Naira took her position beside him, her presence feeling more natural with each passing moment. "With you?" "Always." The repair vessel slipped from its hiding place like a ghost, carrying its mismatched crew deeper into the asteroid field. Behind them, the corporate cruisers continued their search, unaware that their quarry had found something far more valuable than any crystal. They'd found each other. The Stellarian outpost was less than 6 hours away when everything went wrong. Proximity alarms screamed as 3 corporate warships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. Behind them, a massive dreadnought emerged like a metal leviathan against the stars. "They're not trying to capture us anymore," Naira said, her violet eyes wide as she read the sensor data. "Those are kill shots." Finn's hands flew over the controls, pushing their small vessel to its limits. "They must have realized we're close to Stellarian space. They can't risk the crystal reaching your people." A plasma bolt scorched past their hull, close enough to make the shields flicker. Naira stumbled, and Finn caught her automatically with one arm, his other hand never leaving the controls. The casual intimacy of the gesture struck them both, how natural it had become to move in sync, to anticipate each other's needs despite their size difference. "The crystal," Naira said suddenly. "Finn, I need you to trust me one more time." "Always." The word came without hesitation. She reached into her flight suit and withdrew a small device. "This is a quantum resonance chamber. It can amplify the crystal's properties, but..." She hesitated. The interface was designed for Stellarian biology. Using it could kill a human. Another blast rocked their ship. Warning lights flashed across the console as their shields began to fail. "But you could use it," Finn said, understanding dawning. "That's why they wanted you alive. You're not just a scientist, you're a key." "Yes." Her small hand touched his face, those impossible eyes meeting his. "But the interface goes both ways. Whoever initiates the link shares everything. Every memory, every feeling, every secret." The implications hung between them. Total vulnerability. Complete exposure. No hiding, no walls, no pretenses. "Do it," Finn said softly. "Finn, you don't understand." The size difference between our species, it's not just physical. Our neural patterns are different. Like everything else about us. He managed a smile despite the chaos around them. And like everything else, we'll make it work. Together. A direct hit sent them spinning. Hull breach warnings joined the cacophony of alarms. Naira steadied herself against his chest, then reached up, way up, to touch his face one more time. Together, she agreed, and activated the device. The universe exploded into light and sensation. Finn felt himself falling into violet eyes that contained entire galaxies. He was simultaneously massive and tiny, experiencing existence from two wildly different perspectives that somehow, impossibly, complemented each other perfectly. He saw himself through her eyes, not a lonely giant but a gentle guardian whose size made her feel safe rather than small. He felt her initial fascination with humans evolve into something deeper, specifically for him. Her fear that their differences would matter warred with her growing certainty that they enhanced rather than hindered their connection. In turn, Naira experienced his memories of isolation, of choosing loneliness over risking more loss. She felt his wonder at meeting someone whose physical presence was so different from his own, yet whose spirit resonated so perfectly with his. His growing realization that what had started as an impulsive decision to help her had become something profound and transformative. Through their merged consciousness, they became aware of the crystal's true nature. Not just a bridge between organic and artificial minds, but a key to understanding how consciousness itself transcended physical form. In their joining, they proved its fundamental truth, that real connection went beyond size, beyond species, beyond any physical limitation. Together, they reached out to the ships surrounding them. Through the crystal's amplified power, they touched the minds of their pursuers. Not to control, but to share, to let them experience firsthand the truth that physical differences meant nothing compared to the complexity of consciousness itself. The weapons powered down. The dreadnought's targeting systems went dark. In the silence of space, understanding bloomed like a newborn star. When the neural link finally faded, Finn found himself looking down at Naira with new eyes. She barely reached his waist, her small form still pressed against him, but now he understood with perfect clarity that her size was just one facet of who she was, no more defining than his height defined him. "Well," she said, her musical voice carrying echoes of the profound connection they'd shared, "I suppose this means you'll have to come with me to the outpost. They'll need both of us to explain what just happened." "Both of us?" He raised an eyebrow, falling easily into their familiar pattern despite everything that had changed. "Of course." She smiled, and he saw galaxies in that expression. "After all, we just revolutionized the understanding of consciousness across multiple species." And her small hand found his large one, fingers intertwining naturally despite their difference in scale. "I think we proved something else too. That love doesn't care about size." He gently lifted their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. That, and that sometimes the best discoveries come in unexpected packages. She reached up, and he instinctively bent down to meet her halfway. Speaking of which, their first kiss was awkward, beautiful, and perfect, just like them. As their ship limped toward the Stellarian outpost, surrounded by now peaceful corporate vessels, Finn realized that all his years of hiding had led him to this moment. To someone who saw him completely, whose differences complemented his own, and whose heart matched his beat for beat, regardless of size. "You know," Naira murmured against his chest, "the Stellarians have a saying, the greatest journeys begin with a single step, no matter how small." Finn smiled, wrapping his arms around her tiny frame that contained such an immense spirit. "Then I guess we'd better keep walking." And together, the giant human and his tiny Stellarian scientist, they did exactly that, proving with every step that love truly was the one force in the universe that went beyond all measure.